By the age of 26, I thought I had it all. An amazing teaching job in my hometown of Hong Kong, being mentored for promotion. Newly married to the man of my dreams after our week-long, big, fat Indian wedding. Life was good, a dream. In an instant, I nearly lost it all. My crime? Eating from the roadside food stalls in Bombay. My life sentence? An autoimmune disease that was slowly making me self-destruct. The food poisoning had triggered a predisposed gene that, according to doctors, I'd somehow inherited. I couldn't believe it. Isn't an inheritance usually money or jewels? Some kind of priceless treasure? Surely I deserved to inherit something better than this. I spent months in and out of hospital, and I wasn't responding to medication. I started to ask myself if I was going to live. And if I did, whether I would ever have children. The doctors told me and my new husband to prepare for the worst. I grieved for what might have been. At night, I lay awake, wondering what my life had been for, if I was just going to disappear, not have the chance to leave my mark, a legacy of some kind after I was gone. I felt bitter, resentful towards my inheritance, this disease. Newlyweds aren't supposed to talk about dying, but we had that talk. We talked, cried, and prayed, desperate prayers. We were heartbroken when the doctor said we might not have children. I'd always wanted a big family full of laughter and love. My husband refused to be defeated. One day, he took a step of faith and boldly declared, "You know what? The doctor's right. We won't have one child. We're going to have 3. It was this promise that kept me going through the hair loss, night sweats, and my round, swollen face. I didn't give up searching for remedies and stuck to my restricted diet. I worked hard and found the strength to survive. 3 years later, our first child was born. Her name means grace because she's here only by the grace of God. 4 years after that, our second came along. Her name means hope because that is what has carried us. And 9 years after my husband's bold declaration, our third came. His name means youth, a reminder to live with childlike boldness every day. Becoming a mother has been my greatest joy. Like many mothers, I had hopes for what I could give my children, how I could teach them to be in the world, a strong faith, courage, and confidence, resilience to help them rise above tough times. But before I could even discover how to do that, my children showed me how. One day, my 8-year-old daughter asked me a homework question. Why do people migrate? I told her our Sindhi community were involved in the biggest mass migration in world history. In 1947, India became independent from Britain. It was divided into the 2 independent states, Hindu and Sikh majority India, and Muslim majority Pakistan. When the new borders were drawn, chaos from fear and anger amongst the religious minorities led to millions migrating in both directions. Then I took my daughter to the library to find out more. We scanned the bookshelves and found books on the World Wars and the Holocaust, but not a single children's book on partition. My little girl stood there with her hands on her hips and said, "You're making it up, aren't you?" First, I felt a wave of hot anger. And then my heart broke for the 12 million people who lost their homes and the 1 million who died. Without their story written, especially for children to read and know, it was as if it never happened. So I decided to document our family's migration story for my children. As I researched, I realized that the people who lived through partition never talked about it. The blood shed between Hindu, Sikh, and Muslim neighbors was too painful to relive. For my family, because of where the borderline was drawn, the entire homeland of Sindh overnight became part of Pakistan. After living peacefully for centuries with their Muslim neighbors, suddenly my Sindhi Hindu ancestors were forced to leave and became homeless refugees. They lost their place to speak their language and belong. Many, over time, shed their identity. My father came from India to Hong Kong in 1961. I asked him to tell me more and make me understand partition. I knew he had stories to tell. My father told me the story of his friend Arjun, whose family owned a jewelry store. Incoming refugees tried to seize it, along with Arjun's mother and sister. When Arjun's father fought back, they set the whole store on fire. Arjun's family would have burnt to death if their Muslim neighbors, who had loved them and known them for years, hadn't pulled them out. And the story about the train leaving Sindh. Most families were large, but some were only given a few tickets for the train. How to decide who should stay and who should go? And which was safer? There had been rumors about trains being attacked after leaving Pakistan, arriving in India with carriages full of dead bodies and fresh flowing blood. On the morning my great-uncle and auntie were leaving, their neighbors knocked on their door. Down on their knees, they begged them to take their 2 boys with them. "They'll surely die if they stay here," they pleaded. "But we only have 2 train tickets," my great-uncle said. "How can we take them?" In the end, the 2 boys huddled close to my great-auntie, who wrapped them tightly under her sari and carefully climbed onto the train, praying no one would catch them, for sure if they did, they would all be shot. It was a great risk for all of them, and they spent 4 days and nights hiding in the shaft that people used as a toilet. Today, those boys are men with families of their own and are so grateful for the risk taken to save them. There were so many heartbreaking stories, but the one that gripped me most was the one my mother told. The story of Dada Lalchand Dalamal. When everyone else was fleeing for their lives, he stayed behind to give his slain Sindhi brothers and sisters a respectable cremation to help their souls find peace. Each day, he gathered and carried bundles of wood and built funeral pyres with his own bare hands for the bodies lying scattered. He did this while sending his family and newborn granddaughter to safety. They begged him to join them, but he refused. Instead, he kissed his granddaughter on the head, named her Meera, whispered her name into her ear, and then turned to walk back towards the danger. His family never saw him again. Dada Lalchand Dalamal was my great-grandfather. When I heard his story, part of me felt angry. cheated by history and politics at not having had the chance to meet and know this man who belonged to me. But I was also awed and humbled at his selfless integrity in that crucial time of crisis. I wasn't there in 1947. I never had to flee my only home and suffer the horrors and brutal loss experienced during partition. But I did recognize desperation, anxiety, and the hollow dread of staring death in the face. I felt a deep connection to my grandparents' anguish as they tore themselves away from their home. All their treasures, the inheritance due to their children, left behind. All their dreams of growing old by the Kirta Hills and Indus River, shattered in an instant. Their stories made me see my identity in a new light. When I looked in the mirror, it wasn't just my face I could see, but a long line of faces who'd experienced deep pain, but held a quiet strength in their eyes, the strength in knowing that they would survive. I realized where my courage came from, the resilience I found in my darkest hours in that hospital bed. It had come from them. My Sindhi ancestors, my people. Understanding that I belonged to something so much bigger than myself filled me with a new strength. Listening to my parents' story made me want to know more. I asked my mother, "Why didn't you tell me before?" "We stopped looking back," she said. "We had to let go of what we lost in order to move forward and build a future. To give you wings to fly, we cut off part of our route." I looked for someone to blame. My parents were blameless, so where could I point a finger? At no one. I couldn't change the past. But there was something else I could do. Publish my children's book and share it with everyone I could. When I shared our family story with my children, the impact was immediate. My eldest decided to learn the Sindhi language. When I asked her why, she said, "Because Nana and Nani's story is my story too." My middle child hopes that if she's ever in a dangerous situation, she'll have the courage to help others before herself. And my youngest discovered that his favorite Disney movie, The Lion King, is much like our own family story, and that a fighting spirit is something he's inherited. It's in his blood. Our family narrative has given my children a story that they can tell themselves, about themselves. Knowing their Sindhi ancestors rose above their difficulties and challenges has given my children the confidence that they will too. Research shows that children who grow up knowing their family narrative have a stronger sense of control over their lives and higher self-esteem. Because hearing these stories gives children a strong intergenerational self. This means that even if they're only 9 years old, their identity stretches back 100 years. This gives them connection, strength, and resilience. After sharing my story with my family and community, I went on to share it in schools. I wanted to take children back in time so they could understand and empathize with both the victims and survivors of partition. Like with my own children, the response was immediate. In one school, a Korean girl raised her hand. She told me her family had fled from North Korea. She lost her homeland too, and she missed it very much. Listening to my story made her feel she was no longer alone. In another, a Muslim teacher came up to me with tears in her eyes, as she shared her own migration survival story from the other side of the India-Pakistan border. When she finished, she had a smile on her face and said that being able to talk about it filled a part of her that had for a long time felt empty. These were people I didn't know that came from places far from Hong Kong. They were so like me, having lost their roots. By telling my family story, it encouraged others to share theirs and created a safe space for reliving lost lives. Sharing stories helps to develop empathy. It helps people build connection, especially for those who have lost everything, only to start again somewhere new. As I discovered my family's history, I felt both a deep attachment and loss for my homeland, for my ancestors, for all that was left behind. When something is taken from you, you say, "Oi, give that back, it's mine." But I didn't even know I'd lost my culture, language, land, parts of my identity. And while I felt the loss, what I didn't realize is that what my ancestors went through gave me my true inheritance. You see, my inheritance isn't this terrible disease I have to live with. And my inheritance isn't the pain and violence of partition. My true inheritance is the resilience my people had when hope seemed impossible. They worked hard, made sacrifices, and adapted to not only survive, but thrive all over the world today. This treasure of an inheritance helps me overcome this illness. It helps me face hardships that come my way. And I know I'll survive. It's worth more than any diamonds and is something I have passed on to my children, and that will live in their children, ever onwards, binding us together for all time. It took me a long time to claim my inheritance. Are you ready to claim yours? Thank you.